Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a machine that, by all rights, should have been scrap metal, a relic of an era long past.
Right.
Yet it holds one of the most fearsome and most successful records in the history of the entire kaiju war.
It really is a paradox.
We were talking about Cherno Alpha, and its story is just this fascinating, paradoxical deep dive into engineering necessity and, I think, human will.
Indeed. I mean, if you look across the entire timeline of the Jaeger program, where technological advancement was, the supreme ruler, Cherno Alpha, a Mark I, a first-generation unit, it stands as this deliberate and utterly successful rejection of that entire philosophy.
Complete rejection.
We have sources here suggesting that by the time of its final deployment, modern military standards should have rendered it obsolete junk. I mean, just a lumbering relic, incapable of surviving a Category 4 or 5 fight.
But the records tell a radically different story, which is exactly why we're committing a full deep dive to this iron brute.
The numbers don't lie.
They really don't. The raw combat statistics on this machine are staggering. They defy every single piece of conventional wisdom applied to the Jaeger fleet. We're looking at a unit whose mission success rate hovered near 100%.
100%. It's almost unbelievable.
And it secured the single highest number of confirmed kaiju kills of its entire generation.
And that is the core mystery, isn't it? How does the heaviest, oldest, slowest, and least technologically sophisticated unit in the whole fleet achieve that level of lethal efficiency?
Yeah.
It breaks the very logic of the technological arms race that humanity thought it was fighting.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about the comparison set for a second. Its contemporaries and its successors, Gypsy Danger, sleek, digital, plasma-equipped, capable of fine, complex movement.
And Striker Eureka.
Striker Eureka, the fastest unit using titanium light alloys and advanced digital flight controls. Cherno Alpha had?
Yeah,
it had none of that.
Nothing. It was analog, hydraulic, and just utterly reliant on brute, unadulterated force. It was the walking definition of a technological handicap.
And yet, what's truly fascinating is that its success suggests that the design philosophy it was built on was fundamentally correct for that specific war environment, even if it ran completely counter to the global trend of, miniaturization and speed.
So you're saying it succeeded because of its disadvantages?
In a way, yes, not in spite of them. It's a machine that leaned into its limitations and turned them into strengths.
Right. It's the ultimate narrative of the workhorse triumphing over the supercar. So our mission today is to ignore the modern standards of speed, of digital agility, of computing power.
We have to.
To truly understand this legend, we have to analyze Cherno Alpha for what its designers intended it to be. A true mobile fortress.
A fortress on legs.
We need to dig into that Soviet design philosophy that prioritized mass and resistance, its brutally genius hydraulic weapons, and, I think, most critically, the singular, absolutely lethal determination of the two pilots inside, Alexis and Sasha Kaidanovsky. It's a perfect storm. It's an exercise in necessity breeding a unique form of genius. We aren't analyzing clever hardware or some cutting-edge AI.
No.
We are looking at distilled philosophical intent, a refusal to break, translated in a crude, unyielding, and terrifyingly effective engineering.
Okay, so where do we start? The look.
Let's start with the visual context, because its appearance immediately signals that refusal to conform.
The look of Cherno Alpha is where the paradox really begins, because it completely defies all logic aesthetically, as the source notes. When you look at its counterparts, you see these almost athletic, streamlined figures.
Almost heroic.
Heroic, yeah, echoing human musculature. They look like giant action heroes.
And then you look at Cherno Alpha.
Exactly. It just lacks any sense of elegance, any pretense of aerodynamics, or even the basic grace of a modern weapon system. It truly looks like a repurposed industrial complex someone stuck legs on.
It's fundamentally described as a giant nuclear reactor with legs. That's not an exaggeration. Its head unit isn't a sleek helmet or a high-resolution sensor array.
No, it's a giant block.
It's a stack of heavy, blocky components topped by a unit that visually resembles a cooling tower. A design choice that just screams functional cooling requirement over combat visibility.
Everything is function over form.
Absolutely. Its proportions are purely utilitarian, entirely industrial.
The machine looks heavy, it looks clumsy, and it looks slow. If you saw this thing lumbering into battle next to, say, Gypsy Danger, you might just dismiss it. You'd think it belongs in a scrapyard. not on the front lines, against escalating Category 4 threats.
But this aesthetic is precisely why its visual impact works. It's why it resonates so strongly within the universe's narrative.
How so?
Well, it doesn't look like a sophisticated, expensive piece of equipment. It doesn't look like a toy. It looks like a crude, unyielding tool forged for one single purpose: to absorb punishment and retaliate with overwhelming force.
So that utilitarian look communicates durability.
Exactly. A foundational reliance on function over form. You look at it and you don't think fast, you think unbreakable.
And that aesthetic spoke to a terrifying reality: its operational lifespan. We absolutely need to talk about its 6-year run. 6 years of continuous, uninterrupted functionality on the brutal front lines.
6 years is an absolute eternity in the Jaeger program timeline. I mean, especially considering the rapid escalation of kaiju categories. New units, newer tech, better alloys, all were being destroyed at a terrifying rate.
And Cherno was just there.
Cherno Alpha spent those 6 years guarding the Siberian Wall, which was perhaps the most consistently targeted and brutal defense zone on Earth.
The contrast is just so stark. Sources highlight how units that were built years later, faster, more agile, technologically superior, they were often destroyed within weeks or months of deployment.
Gone in a flash.
Yet this Russian tank, this Mark I relic, it just endured. It wasn't just surviving either. It was successfully accumulating the highest confirmed kill record of its generation while being perpetually out of date.
It suggests a foundational invulnerability that other, more advanced Jaegers just didn't have.
It paints a picture of extreme, almost superhuman resilience, both mechanical and, I think, human. The source describes Cherno as the last guardian standing at that Siberian Wall, a lone survivor from an era that was defined by sheer desperation and technological adolescence.
And we have to remember how dangerous that era was, not just from the enemy.
Right. The details of that early era are chilling. The source mentions that during the earliest stages of the war, piloting a Jaeger was so fundamentally dangerous that the pilots often died from radiation exposure before they even had a chance to die from a monster's blow.
That is a staggering detail. It underscores just how archaic and unstable these early machines truly were. We are talking about critical radiation leakage, technological volatility, things that would be completely unacceptable in later plasma battery-powered designs.
So if you're a pilot operating a machine for 6 years under those conditions, knowing that the very operation of the machine itself is actively shortening your lifespan through leakage, it tells you everything you need to know about the absolute commitment and the desperation of the people piloting it.
Exactly. You are operating under a death sentence the moment you step into the cockpit, whether the kaiju attacks or not.
Right.
So to sustain operational readiness and lethal effectiveness for 6 years under that cloud of existential threat, it means the human element was functioning at a level of dedication that is almost impossible for us to comprehend.
Okay, so let's take that context of extreme early danger, these technological limitations, and the need for absolute resilience, and see how it drove the actual engineering. This brings us right to Section 2, the birth of necessity and the Russian philosophy of design.
Right. We have to set the scene. Cherno Alpha was born out of global panic. After the first kaiju attack, the entire world launched into this desperate, uncoordinated arms race. Everyone was scrambling to build the biggest, most effective response.
But the global playing field was anything but level. Our source is crystal clear on this. While wealthier nations could dedicate unlimited budgets to the cutting edge,
Miniaturized microprocessors, exotic lightweight alloys, advanced digital targeting systems.
all of that, the Russian bloc faced a critical resource disadvantage.
They had the raw materials. They had the steel, the copper, the sheer mass. But what they lacked was immediate access to the high technology infrastructure required for a sophisticated, sleek, digitally driven Jaeger program.
Like the Mark IIIs that were already in development in other nations.
Precisely. And this forced the pivot. When you cannot afford sophisticated subtlety, you prioritize brute strength and survival.
So the design mandate shifted entirely. Instead of building the fastest or the most technologically advanced machine, they built the one that was the most resistant, the one most capable of absorbing catastrophic damage.
They built the machine that prioritized structural survival above everything else. They focused entirely on what they did have in abundance: massive amounts of raw, unyielding structural strength.
It's the philosophy of the siege engine, not the fighter jet.
Exactly. They chose to be an immovable object rather than an unstoppable force, although, as we're about to see, they somehow managed to become both at the same time.
Which brings us directly to the physical embodiment of that philosophy, and Cherno's greatest weakness, and secretly, its greatest strength, the nuclear heart. otherwise known as the 2,400-ton problem.
Right. Without the ability to manufacture compact, safe plasma batteries like the newer Jaegers, they were forced to use the technology they did have, a massive, archaic, and fundamentally unstable fission energy source.
This wasn't just a battery. I mean, the source describes it as the entire engine room of a Soviet-era icebreaker ship bolted inside a robot.
That's a great way to put it. The sheer scale and weight of this reactor, a staggering 2,400 tons, presented an almost insurmountable engineering challenge for standard Jaeger architecture.
So where do you put something that heavy?
Well, that was the problem. If you look at standard biomechanics, a heavy power source would be placed low to maintain a stable center of gravity, or maybe in a rear housing. But that weight and instability meant it couldn't be placed freely. If they put 2,400 tons in the back, the spine would be a perpetual failure point. It would just snap. If they placed it in the legs, the gate would be impossibly slow and incredibly vulnerable to crippling damage.
So the engineers had to make a drastic, a completely counterintuitive choice about its placement.
They did. They realized that the only area capable of supporting that tonnage and receiving the thickest, most concentrated armor plating in the entire structure was the upper central torso. It had to be encrusted right in the center of mass, like a massive lead-lined stone.
That one decision is monumental, isn't it? Because it just dictated the entire geometry and combat style of Cherno Alpha.
It dictated everything. They essentially wrapped the machine around its power source, creating a mobile fortress where the very core was designed to be immovable and impervious. The cost was speed and agility, but the payoff was an almost guaranteed operational life extension in the face of punishment.
And what's fascinating is that this 2,400-ton decision immediately transformed Cherno Alpha into a machine that was aesthetically ugly and practically slow. Everything was compromised to protect that unstable heart.
Right.
But as the source points out, a fortress is only as good as the general commanding it. This is where we have to transition from the metal to the mind.
Correct. The Russian high command understood the trade-off they'd made. They had a massive, technologically deficient Mark I chassis. It was, as you said, just an amplifier.
Just a tool.
To make it effective, they didn't need just capable soldiers. They needed pilots who were intrinsically as, or maybe even more dangerous than the crude machine they inhabited.
And they found them in Alexis and Sasha Kaidanovsky. This is perhaps the greatest psychological factor in Cherno Alpha's unprecedented success. The human element wasn't merely sufficient, it was superlative. It challenged the very axioms of Jaeger science.
Let's discuss the drift paradox they represented, because this is huge. Early Jaeger science dictated that for a successful neural interface, the drift, stability was thought to be found only in shared blood siblings, parents, and children.
Right, that was the formula. Genetic commonality provided a stable bridge between two minds.
Yet the Kaidanovskys threw that manual right into the nuclear reactor. They were only a couple, united by a relationship, by absolute commitment, not by genetics. And yet, they forged a neural link so profound, so deeply intertwined, that it is noted in the records as surpassing the stability and synchronization of any pair of blood relatives or twins operating a Jaeger.
Think about the implications of that for a second. It suggests that a unified, singular will, a total commitment to a shared objective forged in shared trauma and love, can override and even surpass mere biological similarity.
So what does that tell us about their relationship? It wasn't just romantic love. It was an absolute terrifying unity of purpose where two independent minds became functionally one weapon system.
They operated this unstable analog beast without the synchronization failure and cognitive backlash that plagued so many other early drift pairs.
But the true driver of their lethality was the absolute unrelenting pressure they carried. We have to understand the political and economic context here.
Right.
Russia had emptied its resources, sacrificed its remaining economic stability, and used its very last available specialized metal and budget to put this one single titan into service.
This wasn't a standard deployment.
Yeah.
This was the nation's final, definitive throw of the dice. The sources state clearly there was no budget for a second attempt, no metal for a replacement chassis.
They had zero margin for error, zero chance of calling for reinforcements.
If Cherno Alpha fell, the entire Russian defense strategy, the national hope for survival, the economy that had been bled dry to build it,
it all fell with them.
They were not just fighting a monster, they were shouldering the fate of an entire nation every single time they stepped into that cockpit.
And what did that absolute unrelenting pressure forge in the Kaidanovsky's minds?
Something terrifying.
It created a singular psychological state where the concepts of defeat, retreat, or even damage mitigation simply ceased to exist. Their mission was always the same: annihilate the threat, secure the victory, regardless of the cost to the machine or to themselves.
The result was that legendary, terrifying efficiency. Every battle they fought was an absolute slaughter. The sources are graphic. Kaijus facing Cherno Alpha weren't merely beaten back or wounded. They were ripped apart with terrifying abysmal cruelty.
Their strikes were not about neutralizing the threat. They were about achieving the total, overwhelming annihilation of the enemy.
But let me introduce a challenge here, based on the source material. If they operated under this zero margin for error mindset for 6 continuous years, wouldn't that immense constant pressure eventually lead to, I don't know, a degradation of the drift or a psychological breaking point? Did the sources suggest their connection was unstable near the end?
That's a crucial point, and the data suggests the opposite, which is perhaps the most incredible aspect of their partnership. Yes. Unlike other pairings that failed due to cognitive dissonance caused by extended combat stress, the Kaidanovsky's connection seems to have been strengthened by the pressure. The unity was absolute. They shared the trauma, but they didn't divide it. They multiplied their resolve.
So it was a feedback loop of sheer, unyielding determination.
Exactly. This synergy, the crude, indestructible machine meeting the unbreakable, determined will, turned the technologically deficient Mark I into a machine that wasn't just feared by the kaiju, but by the precursor intelligence itself.
Their lethality became a guaranteed certainty. And that brings us perfectly to Act 2. How that psychological commitment was translated into action via the macabre genius of Cherno's brutal engineering.
Right, the arsenal.
Let's look at the arsenal, because this is where the ugly design really transitions into mechanical brilliance. When you compare Cherno's weaponry to the others,
Plasma cannons, energy swords, missile launchers.
Cherno's weapon system seems ridiculously primitive.
Functionally, it had no long-range capacity, no energy tricks, no sleek secondary systems. Its strategy was pure, terrifying simplicity. Close the distance and strike immediately.
But to just say it punched things is to miss the point entirely.
It's to miss the profound engineering adaptation that solved the biggest physical problem of the war.
And that problem was the kaiju's hide. As the categories escalated, the dermal layers became thicker, denser, and often reinforced with calcified plates like layered steel armor.
A standard punch, even from a giant robot, just wouldn't achieve penetration or vital organ damage against the later category monsters.
So the Russian engineers adapted. They essentially converted Cherno's arms into what the sources dubbed gigantic hydraulic siege pistons.
They developed the Rolls-Royce system, which fundamentally changed the nature of the Jaeger's close combat from a simple punch into an explosive impact tool.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of that, because this is where the detail really separates the deep dive from the surface summary.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about making the arms heavy, it was about compounding kinetic force.
Correct. Imagine the forearm housing itself as a massive, high-tension spring powered by extremely dense, non-compressible hydraulic fluid. We're probably talking about specialized polymer fluids for maximum pressure transfer.
Okay.
The system was designed to retract the forearm slightly, accumulating an immense volume of hydraulic pressure internally. Think of compressing the force of a small tidal wave into a few meters of piston travel.
So when the arm makes contact, it's not just the weight of the swing hitting the target.
Precisely. Upon impact, and only upon impact, that immense hydraulic pressure is released forward in a fraction of a second. This action effectively tripled the force of penetration.
Wow.
It transformed the arm from a simple kinetic weapon into what is functionally a building-sized, pressurized pneumatic hammer or spike driver.
The force is exponentially increased at the exact moment it matters most. It's an instantaneous shockwave of pressure applied to a tiny surface area that is absolutely brutal, especially against calcified plates that would normally shatter a standard Jaeger's fist.
It allowed Cherno Alpha to bypass the issue of kaiju armor entirely. They weren't trying to bruise the monster. They were trying to achieve rapid, catastrophic penetration and internal organ damage in a single blow. It solved the armor problem with pure, engineered kinetic overload.
But here's the most profound revelation. The true genius of the Jaeger's disproportional design, connecting back to that massive, ugly, 2,400-ton nuclear reactor we discussed earlier.
Yes.
The real devastation, as our source notes, comes not just from the arms, but from the physics of the punch itself, the kinetic counterweight.
This is where we see the necessity-driven design become biomechanically perfect. The principle is fundamental to any powerful strike, whether it's boxing or a martial arts discipline.
Right.
A truly lethal blow doesn't originate from the shoulder or the arm muscles alone. It comes from the transfer of body mass, generated by the rotation of the hips and the kinetic momentum of the entire torso mass behind the strike.
Modern Jaegers, being lighter and more agile, they try to achieve this mass transfer through incredibly complex advanced joint movement, propulsion systems, and digital stabilization. They compensate for their lighter frame with speed and technical finesse.
Cherno Alpha didn't need to compensate. It was built to embody this core principle in the most analog, powerful way possible.
Like the reactor.
The massive nuclear reactor, situated in that upper central torso, the element that made it look so strange, so slow, and so top-heavy, was in fact the ultimate kinetic counterweight. It was a 2,400-ton inertial flywheel positioned perfectly for maximum kinetic transfer.
So when the Kaidanovskys rotated the waist to strike, Cherno wasn't just throwing a punch powered by hydraulics.
No. It was swinging the entire weight of the central reactor core in an arc of unstoppable inertia. It converted the machine's center of gravity, which should have been its greatest structural weakness, into its most devastating weapon.
The energy transfer resulting from this combined hydraulic and kinetic strike was so absurdly powerful that the source details the definitive consequence. It literally decapitated the beasts.
It ripped the head straight from the neck through pure, overwhelming shearing force and kinetic energy.
Let's just pause on that image for a moment. Most Jaegers are aiming for the center of mass, hoping to collapse a lung or break a spine.
Sure.
Cherno Alpha was engineered for instant, guaranteed decapitation. That requires an almost contemptuous level of destructive power.
The resulting strike wasn't just a hit. It was an act of guaranteed mathematical overkill. What the world saw as an ugly and obsolete design, the massive, disproportionate torso, was actually the most perfect biomechanical execution of close-quarters war philosophy ever conceived.
It sacrificed everything for that one perfect blow.
It sacrificed speed and agility for one thing, the mathematically guaranteed delivery of an unstoppable kinetic blow.
And for 6 years, that philosophy, combined with the lethal will of the Kaidanovskys, proved unbeatable. It survived longer and killed more than its sleek, superior counterparts.
Which leads us inevitably to the discussion of its end.
Section 5. And this is essential because it refutes the popular lie surrounding Cherno Alpha's destruction. The easy, comfortable narrative suggests it fell because it was too slow, too old, or just technologically outpaced when it encountered the double event in Hong Kong.
But the source material strongly refutes this. Cherno Alpha was not simply defeated in a fair fight. It was not outclassed by superior technology.
It was hunted.
Hunted. That's a critical distinction because it elevates the intelligence of the enemy, the Precursors, and reinforces Cherno's truly legendary status. After years of continuous victories and brutal, efficient destruction, the Precursors recognized that they could not defeat the Russian tank with generic, mass-produced monsters.
Cherno Alpha had become such a systemic, perpetual problem, an insurmountable barrier preventing key breaches, that the abyssal intelligence had to dedicate massive, unique biological resources just to defeating it.
They didn't send monsters at random. They sent a custom-designed assassination squad specifically to nullify Cherno's overwhelming advantages.
So let's analyze the attack itself, starting with Otachi. Otachi is known for its highly corrosive acid attack. This wasn't a random evolutionary trait, was it?
Not at all. The sources confirm this corrosive substance was bio-designed with the unique, focused purpose of melting Cherno's heavy alloy.
It was custom-made acid for custom-made armor. The Precursors created a chemical solution specifically for the heavy alloy mixture Russia had used, which suggests deep, strategic reconnaissance of human technology.
And the targeting wasn't random either. Otachi attacked surgically, aiming its corrosive stream directly at the reactor housing. The Precursor intelligence had identified the Jaeger's deepest design flaw. That 2,400-ton core was the structural key, and melting the armor around that specific point was the only way to open the can and compromise the entire system.
So the armor, which was Cherno's greatest strength, became its single critical vulnerability because the core had to be there, and it had to be protected by the thickest metal.
And once that specific, dense armor yielded to the tailored acid, the entire structural integrity was compromised. That's when Leatherback, the second kaiju, arrived to complete the task. That level of tactical focus and finality is terrifying, and it provides the ultimate insight into the Precursor intelligence. They understood that the true danger was not the metal shell, not the kinetic counterweight, and not the hydraulic pistons. The danger was the two minds driving it.
They knew that if the Jaeger fell but Sasha and Alexis survived, they would remain a lethal threat to the entire operation. They needed to ensure the pilots were dead.
The attack was orchestrated not to destroy a machine, but to execute two specific people who had become the greatest obstacle to their invasion.
So Cherno Alpha did not lose a fair fight. It wasn't technologically outclassed in an open confrontation. It was the victim of a calculated surgical assassination orchestrated by an alien intelligence that quite clearly feared the pilots more than any weapon system ever designed by humanity.
That fact alone speaks volumes about the legacy we're discussing.
It transforms the narrative from a simple tragedy of obsolescence into a profound military loss, where the enemy had to dedicate unique biological and tactical resources just to eliminate a single machine and, much more importantly, a single unbreakable partnership.
Which brings us into Section 6. Why the adoration? Why does Cherno Alpha command such intense respect and reverence within the community and across the operational timeline?
Beyond the sheer industrial aesthetic and the brute force style, it comes down to what our source calls the ultimate complement.
I love this part.
Cherno Alpha is the only Jaeger in the entire franchise that was so brutally powerful and so continuously successful that the very script, the narrative framework, had to utilize every available resource, including fabricating custom-made monsters with bioengineered weaknesses just to bring it down.
That is the highest badge of honor a weapon system can receive. You weren't defeated by a standard enemy or outpaced by the march of technology. You were defeated by an enemy that had to functionally cheat to win. They had to dedicate an assassination squad to your demise.
It makes its end, though tragic, deeply poetic. It required a unique solution for a unique, seemingly unstoppable problem.
And this brings us directly to the definitive lesson offered by Cherno Alpha's history, the conclusion we draw from this entire deep dive.
Which is?
This Mark I proved that in the reality of this war, victory never relied on having the most brilliant technology, the fastest processors, or the most modern, sleek design.
The machine was always secondary. It was necessary, yes, but it was merely the scaffolding. The engineering of the reactor as a kinetic counterweight, the brutal force of the hydraulic pistons, all of that was brilliant, but it was just a vehicle.
What truly mattered, what converted that pile of rusted metal into an operational legend for 6 uninterrupted years, was the human element, the absolute unity, the unbreakable connection, and the sheer lethal will of the people inhabiting it.
The real weapon was the perfect synchronization of Alexis and Sasha Kaidanovsky. Their refusal to yield transformed every design constraint, the weight, the slowness, the instability, into a tactical advantage. The machine was merely an extension of their singular, shared refusal to lose.
And that's why, in the history of the Kaiju War, there may have been faster Jaegers, and there certainly have been more technologically advanced ones.
But there was never, and will never be, a will more lethal or a connection more absolute than that of Sasha and Alexis Kaidanovsky.
That is the core of the Cherno Alpha legend, preserved in the historical records and in the fear it instilled in the Precursors. It wasn't about technological superiority, it was about psychological and philosophical commitment.
That brings us to the end of this deep dive into the Fortress Mobile, Cherno Alpha. We've analyzed how necessity drove genius engineering, how the unstable reactor was secretly a weapon, why the pilot's will was absolute, and how its fall was not a defeat but a calculated tactical assassination. We hope this has given you a profound respect for the old iron.
Before we close, this entire analysis raises a profound thought that builds directly on the source material and the confirmed intelligence of the Precursors.
Okay.
Given they demonstrated the capacity to create bioengineered countermeasures, custom acid, specialized assassins, specifically designed to nullify a massive technology gap, what does this tell us about the ultimate limits of technological warfare?
That is a critical question for any future conflict. If the enemy intelligence can organically adapt and produce a specific biological solution designed to defeat your latest, most expensive alloy or plasma shield.
Are we truly fighting a war of technology, or are we fundamentally engaged in a war of biological adaptation?
Right.
If biology can always create a countermeasure to physics, perhaps the real solution isn't simply better machines, but a deeper, more immediate understanding of the enemy's intelligence and its capacity for rapid, targeted evolution. They didn't just send stronger monsters, they sent smarter ones.
And that, more than any physical blow Cherno Alpha ever took, should be the most alarming takeaway for anyone studying this conflict. Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.